So with that, how's the weather there in Fat City?
I mean, as you'd expect, it's been really rainy, especially these past few months. Apparently, we've been hitting all kinds of inches of rain records. But I mean, remarkably, it's never been that bad. For those of you who aren't familiar, I live in New Orleans, and it's very rainy and it floods a lot. But it's also very particular about like what areas will flood at what times, and
like the low lying ones.
This is true. I mean, usually you can kind of guess which areas are going to flood, but it's been weird lately. Like there's been a lot of rain on the North Shore and like places like Slidell and Manville, and New Orleans has actually not had a lot of major flooding, even though we've had days with 8 and 9 inches of rain.
So, oh wow, yeah, that's pretty good to get that much rain and not get flooding in New Orleans.
I mean, there's definitely the places you'd expect still get a little flooding, but it's not like people get angry about pumps shutting down and stuff like that. And there haven't been too many instances of that this year so far. Knock on wood.
Well, that's good. And just so everybody knows, a lot of the pumps in New Orleans are in New Orleans, which is below sea level. So when it rains, the water doesn't really have anywhere to go except via the pumps out into the big lake, the giant lake nearby. So if the water rises above that inside of the bowl of New Orleans, then the pumps get suffocated by water, which is always kind of like, that's an engineering feat.
Yeah.
And speaking of Slidell, that area is always crazy too, because as one might not know, the roads are generally used as the mechanism in which to have water flow off of the area, because it's also so low, not below sea level, but so low that you really can't put like something like a basement or pipes in and expect them to be empty to have capacity to flow water through. So the streets act as the mechanism to remove all the water. And by proxy, when you drive through the streets, all of a sudden you have like a foot of water because everything's funneled into them. And if you don't have a big truck or something, you might not go somewhere. And you might be walking through the water very quickly. But yeah, so lessons on the lands and the metro area of Fat City. By the way, Fat City is New Orleans. If you don't know that, why there, I'm just going to let you Google it. You can figure it out. So that's interesting that you've been getting floods, because up here in Seattle, we've been getting insane heat, and everything's burning. Again, though, it's like the 4th or 5th year in a row where it started to burn, and I'm ready to get the masks back out and like cover my eyeballs and tear up every time the soot is flying through the sky, and it looks like a Mad Max apocalypse. But we learn to live with our oopses.
Yeah. You get used to that kind of stuff so quickly. I don't know. It's weird.
Fortunately and sadly, like all at the same time, right? It's like, well, we shouldn't be getting used to this. We should be fixing it. But since we're in this situation, I guess we got to get used to it.
Yeah.
So in a completely unrelated topic, what have you been working on these days?
Yeah. So my main focus pretty much for the past year has been a project called Apache Iceberg, which is a distributed data lake, data table format sort of thing. It's all about trying to make it easier to do ACID compliant transactions and things on top of file-based data stores. So competing kind of ideas are things like Snowflake, Databricks, Delta, things like that. Apache Iceberg is just another contender there.
Cool. So is that being built with any specific context to, say, Apache Cassandra to do transactional things there?
Yeah, not so much. I mean, like the main use case for Iceberg is you've got several hundred terabytes, petabytes of data, huge amounts of data that's mostly static because it's not really made for transaction, for rapid transaction. It's not an OLTP thing. It's an OLAP sort of thing. So it's about handling that kind of stuff and making it easier for Presto or Spark or Flink to actually operate on that data, right? So
Gotcha.
So like one of the things that made this kind of like an important project is you have a lot of folks using Hive, right? And you're using Hive with this huge amount of data, and you end up hitting a few problems really quickly. Like first, you've got tons and tons of files in lots of directories, and you really want to like merge them or compress them, and you need to do that in a way that is transactional, right? So if you've got data files in your partition, you want to like squish them into larger files rather than having tons of tiny files, because every time you write new files, you're just adding more and more load on the file system. The other problem being every time you want to do a read, you have to do list operations on that file system, which is not a super painful thing in HDFS, but in object stores, we don't want to do list operations. We want to never do list operations. They're super expensive.
Right.
So the idea in Iceberg and in a bunch of these other technologies is like, let's build another metadata layer on top of that, and we'll keep the actual table state in this other layer rather than having it just be like, I'm going to list all the files and that's the table. The table is whatever I got out of this list operation, because we know that that's like super complicated, because then everyone starts talking about, okay, well, what commit protocol are you using when you're writing files? Because you have to figure out how do you move all your files in a way that doesn't like move only some of them and not all of them, and how do you recover from a failed write? So you fix all of these problems by basically putting a metadata layer on top and saying that this metadata layer knows the exact state of the table at this point in time. And to make a new change to the table, you have to build a new set of metadata based on that old set. So it'll basically say, these are all the files that were important. Here are the metric information for them. So we don't even have to read those footers to like do planning. We just go through all of this metadata and information that we aggregate, and basically you can speed up query planning and allow for transactions without actually like locking all sorts of stuff down.
Right, that's cool. So so you have this metadata layer, and then you have files. But so what happened? Is it in charge of like doing the file actions to ensure that the state stays informed of what it actually is?
So let me do the real physical example, because I think that'll make it a lot clearer. So like, the metadata layer here is really just more files, but you'll have, for example, what we would call a manifest. And the manifest will say, in this particular transaction, file A was added, file B was added, file C was deleted. So then when I read the table, I basically have to use an Iceberg API. So that's where we have these integrations with Presto, Flink, and Spark, right?
And those
Splink,
close enough.
You know, it's probably a project by now. So who even, whatever. So those projects are then going to use the Iceberg APIs to say, okay, I'm querying this table, and basically they'll first probably get a reference to a metastore, like a Hive metastore, which will say the current metadata file that you need to like read to get the state of the table is X. So you read that file and it says, okay, these are all the files that are currently live. And now everything you do is in the context of that file, that metadata file that you just read. If you're going to add new data, basically what all of those engines will do is they'll say, okay, you're running an insert operation. To run an insert operation, I read the old state, I make new state based on it, and then I attempt to do a pointer swap of the catalog from pointing from the old state to the new state. And you do that with a check and set, right? So you only want to do the swap if the old state is the one that you expect. And that's how you get the transactional nature of everything. Because you can basically say, if the old state isn't what I expect, then I haven't built a linear history from the current state to the one I want. And then there's like a whole bunch of retry mechanisms. Like, can we, if it's like just an insert, right, it's monotonic and we can really apply it at any time. So you basically just go back and say, okay, I'll just rebuild my metadata based on the now current snapshot. So basically have a retry loop where you can do that. But there's cases where you can't do that and you have to like completely rebuild your operation. So that's in cases if you're doing something like a merge, right? So if you've got a ton of data coming in that's adjusting records that are already in the database, if the state changed in between your operation, you getting all of your files ready, getting your metadata ready, and then trying to do that pointer swap, your pointer flip is no longer valid, right? Because you may have deleted data that was part of the data that you just said is modified.
Yeah,
so then you have to redo everything. But that's basically how the whole system works, is we guard everything by doing this pointer swap.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm always... it's always fascinating problems. Not that I have to tell you that, but it's always fascinating trying to do transactional things, or even things close to that, where you're trying to like follow a pattern of work.
Yeah.
And then like the slightest little thing puts a dent in it, and you're like, oh, well, okay, what's our full process now? Like it becomes this whole nother different thing. And I always like working with that kind of stuff, though. That's interesting, and it's cool to hear that you are working on that. I try to follow Apache Projects, but that's slightly difficult, being that there's like a billion of them all the time. So now I feel compelled to go look this one up and dig into it some, in addition to all the others. But I know just in the past couple of weeks, I've been looking at the Cassandra 4.0, and then I've actually looked into Mongo a little bit, because as I do often, I've been toying about with getting some GraphQL stuff working on those, and also trying to do transactional stuff with that, where the GraphQL just doesn't, that's not what it does. But you still need to manage that. So like the server all of a sudden gains this responsibility of like, well, if there's a call, it needs to take into account all these things. So all of a sudden there's these processes that the GraphQL server is taking responsibility for. And that's where you kind of have like all this stuff rolled in, and I'm like, oh, now I need Cassandra for this, or I need Flink for that, or blah, 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 to make the GraphQL seamless to the web developer that's requesting this little piece of data that expects it to be in whatever state that they expect it to be in. But fun challenges. It always takes inordinate amount of time, which always makes me scratch my head. I'm like, wow, somebody's paying me to figure this out. So that's good stuff, though.
Yeah, it's good. I'm glad that I'm not like really in the operational level of that anymore, because I feel like it's a way harder problem at the, like when you're trying to figure out how to do this with millisecond latency and concurrency of operations versus we have inserts that are happening every hour, or we have several that are happening within the same minute, but like we can retry them. Because like, so obviously in the situation I've described, the catalog locking and compare and swap is our main concurrency mechanism there. So if that can't go quickly, then you've got problems. And currently we have a lot of implementations that are using the Hive Metastore. And I didn't know this before I started working on this project, but the Hive Metastore, which has locking operations, the locking operations are serializable. So if multiple clients attempt to lock at the same time, it actually builds a chain of locks in order for all of those. So each lock has a connection to the previous locks, which means when you then are checking your lock state, you have to actually check the state of your lock and all of its chained locks. So it becomes more and more expensive to work on it, the more concurrent lockers you have. So
yeah, you could get like a massive backlog, and just, I can imagine your systems just chunk up and like fall over on itself at some point.
Yeah, I mean, we're always kind of dealing with kind of issues around that. But I mean, obviously you don't need it to be Hive Metastore. It could be anything with a compare and swap. You really just need a consistent compare and swap operation. Everything else you can do optimistically, and either you succeed on the compare and swap or you don't. And if you don't, you just delete everything and you try again. So it's all okay.
Yeah, that works. Oh man, my brain's now running in 50 billion different directions, which is exactly what happens whenever I start thinking about this stuff. I have to like wield my OCD and ADHD brain patterns to focus on one aspect of things. It's always the first challenge.
Oh yeah, no, I have similar problem where I was recently I've been looking into Z ordering, and the math was just so interesting. I'm like, oh, I really need to like try to implement this. And I didn't even like think about how I was going to get all of the rest of it into the project. And I was just like, I'm just going to write everything to actually do Z ordering. And I didn't actually write out any ways to maintain the Z order metrics.
Yeah.
So I get clustered data files, but I don't have like a really cool way of reading into them. But luckily, there are some folks at Dremio who are working also on open source Apache Iceberg, and they were working completely unbeknownst to me on working on the same read path. So they apparently have a lot of that done. So I'm like, yeah, that's really great.
That's cool.
I was just like, what would be really cool is to actually try to do this myself and see if I can write it out all the values in Z order. And
yeah.
It's fun.
That's cool. Do you find yourself when you're working on these projects bumping into other teams like Dremio very often?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, especially on this one. So Apache Iceberg, it's basically born at Netflix. If you know Ryan Blue, he's basically one of the key people who made it a reality, and it's because they were hitting all those problems I was discussing before, right? You've got these huge Hive instances, and Hive has got problems. So like at first, everyone's just writing all these special commit protocols to try to make it happen and make it work and not be all kind of ridiculous. But at a certain point, you're just like, okay, we're just working around the fact that we really need like a central authority on table state, and we need a way of tracking that. And so he developed the project. So there's a bunch of Netflix folks working on it. There's also a lot of folks from Adobe and IBM and Microsoft and Amazon. So this is one of the, so I worked on Cassandra and Spark, and this is one of the first times I've been on a project where I feel like there are a lot of companies all working on it at the same time. Because I don't want to besmirch other projects, but there are some projects where like there's a driving force, and they're able to pretty much make sure the project happens in a certain way. And here, maybe because it's very young, but it just feels like there's way more voices, everyone trying to push different things. I mean, it definitely helps that like, some company, I forget exactly which group is doing this, but like the group behind Flink is just really interested in Flink. So they're like pushing all of the Flink side stuff. And then every time they hit core, everyone else gets to kind of chime in, and we all got to like think about what's going on. Cause so it's really fun. I really like it as a project. It's full of really nice people trying to do really complicated things.
That's cool. Yeah. That's one of the things I always like about open source, and maybe it's because of my own mental headspace, but the somewhat chaotic nature of it, especially when there are multiple drivers on the bus, so to speak, right? Where, there's people who are really driven to do X, Y, Z, even though everybody else may want A, B, C, and you really got to kind of coordinate that. And it's a little bit of madness, but I don't know. I just kind of eat that up. I love that to some degree. And it just really, it drives a lot of thinking, and it drives a lot of smartness into what is trying to be done, right? So that's always been fun. But it can be, as I was explaining to some persons that were attempting to get into technology, I was like, if you don't like chaos, you might not want to exactly work on open source projects. Yeah. You might want to find maybe find some data to just run reports on. Like, I don't know exactly what to do if you don't like chaos, but trying to get into an open source project is a difficult pill to swallow in that regard. Yeah, but if you do like chaos, you're set. Oh man.
I mean, I'm always trying to discuss this with my family and friends who aren't in tech, and they're like, so like, why are you paid to do this? Like, but what you're writing, anyone can use. And I'm like, the value proposition for companies that employ open source programmers is usually that they're heavily using that technology.
Right.
And they want to make sure that their priorities get in, that their support requests are handled. And they like that it's open source because they're also getting top talent from a whole lot of other companies to all work on the same thing. So it's one of those weird things where they're like, it actually makes sense for us to spend money on this because we're going to get a ton of benefit out of it by having experts on hand, and also we'll derive benefits from all of the other engineers at these other companies who are working on it.
Yep.
So it works pretty well, I think.
I feel like as long as there's appropriate interest, or I should say volume of interest, mm-hmm. and vested interest from the company to have XYZ thing work, the open source project paradigm works exceptionally well. Mm-hmm. More so than let's start a company to sell open source thing because someone might want it. That's often, as the industry has found out, a difficult thing to coordinate, mm-hmm. right? But like I've worked Home Depot, I've worked with like Walmart Labs and some of the other large enterprises, and most of their open source involvement has become exactly that, where they have a large vested interest in a product or some type of service level thing, and they're going to implement it, and they want to make sure they have input and make sure that they get support, and they end up with staff to do that. And they have such a vested interest that having staff is actually not a big cost overall to make sure that that core fundamental thing works. It's just like when you get left pad, nobody knows who needs to support that, and mm-hmm. nobody wants to pay a developer to support that. Yeah. But for the big things, the complex things, it definitely works really, really well. It's pretty awesome.
I think the complexity is important. I mean, it's weird because like we're always actively trying to reduce the complexity of these projects, but it's also one of the reasons that you have to like fund them. But I do think it's because for a lot of these problems, they're just intrinsically complex. Like I don't care how many people try to do this. There's like no simple way to deal with distributed computation. Like we're getting into like problems where you have to start talking about relativity to like even figure out why you can't, simultaneously say things happen. And that's not going to go away. Like there's no technological leap that's going to make latency disappear. It's always going to exist. So
yeah, I kind of, it's one of those things like when you're trying to fix the problem, it's frustrating, but then at the same time you step away and you look at, you talk about the abstract notion and it just sounds so cool because you are talking about relativity and such and speed of light issues, etc. I always find it fascinating when somebody not super familiar with things hears about a speed of light problem. They're like, what do you talk about? It's like speed of light problem. Does it move fast enough?
Yeah.
Is it going to get there in time to get the right state? It's like, yeah, we're dealing with a speed of light problem. So that's always
100%. 100%. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. So aside from all this stuff, you live and code and work in New Orleans, and I'm fascinated by that very much because I grew up in a little town called Picayune, which the newspaper mm-hmm. is sort of pseudo named after there in New Orleans, and I lived quite a bit of years doing my first paid work as a musician over in the Garden District and playing places like down on Decatur and the famous street, Bourbon Street. How can I forget that? I almost forgot. But that whole area. So I played blues and jazz and a little bit of metal out in Metairie and that kind of stuff. So I'm always curious when someone makes New Orleans work for a tech career, because it's not always like the first option. Like, oh, I've heard of all these great tech jobs in New Orleans. Like that's not usually a thing. It's usually like, oh, I can go drill for oil in the Gulf of Mexico, but so how is that working for you? How have you managed that?
I mean, I'm definitely very lucky. I mean, my whole career has been one of the luckiest things I think that could happen to a person is that I happen to be interested in the weirdest mathematical things that happen to be very valuable at the right time. And that could have easily not been the case. But because of that, so as you know, I worked at DataStax before, and I did a lot of work with the Spark Cassandra connector, and basically, took over that project after a while. And luckily, because of that, I got well known enough in the Cassandra and Spark communities that, DataStax was all remote. And I was just like, well, I think I'll be able to get another remote job if I moved. So I lived in Oakland at the time, and I just decided, me and my wife were thinking about all the different places we could live in the country after all of our friends in the Bay Area were moving out who weren't in tech.
Yeah.
And New Orleans seemed like a lot of fun. So my wife Maggie was an Air Force kid, so she was out at the base out near Biloxi, which I forget the name of.
Keesler.
Yeah, Keesler. So she was there when she was like in grade school time. So she had a lot of fond memories of the Gulf Coast. And we came down here. We spent a month as kind of like a trial, working remotely.
Mm-hmm.
And we loved it then. And so then we made about 4 years ago, we made the move. And once I got down here, I mean, you're definitely right. There's not a lot of big tech opportunities. So there is tech groups in New Orleans. Yesterday I was at the NOLA Hack Night. If anyone's watching this who lives in the New Orleans greater area, you should check out the NOLA Hack Night. And we all just meet at a hotel, and it's a really interesting mix of like a ton of people who are right out of boot camps who are like looking for jobs in the area. And there's like a lot of front end developers. So I know nothing about that. So I'm always there and I'm just like, I don't know what you guys are doing. I don't know how this works. It's really cool. I like how you do all this stuff, but I don't understand any of it. And then there's a small cadre of folks who basically brought their jobs in, right? Who were senior developers somewhere else and then kind of came in. So there's still like a core group of folks who are working at a lot of big tech companies, but it's definitely tiny compared to the Bay Area. So.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, everything's kind of tiny compared to that. It's almost not fair to compare anything to that, because it's like, well, SF and Bay Area Metro is kind of just it's like the ground spring of a lot of the big, the fruit companies and the Oogles and the Flixies and whatever else. So it's kind of hard to compare when you have those giants out there. But
it's such a difference. So like I used to go to meetups all the time in the Bay Area when I lived in Oakland. I was going to San Francisco like multiple times a week because I was like, this is the only way I'm going to be able to like really learn about everything that's going on.
Yeah.
And there, like if you go to like the Spark meetups or the Hadoop meetups, and I was going to all of those things. It's like different people every week, because there's so many people, and it's just not like a thing you do to kind of really be in a community. Mm-hmm. And what really changed my mind about like meetups in general is I once, actually twice, I spoke at the Sacramento Java users group. And Sacramento has a much smaller population of programmers, but there everyone knew everyone. Like it was an actual group of people who were in tech, but they were all a community, like a real community of people who like care about each other and their lives and like what's going on and like how are you doing and how is your family and all that. And New Orleans is the same thing, right? You go to the meetups here, and it's a smaller group than the Bay Area, but everyone is part of it together. It's a lot of people together who all just happen to work on the same thing.
Yeah. So when I was in that area, one of the things I started doing while I was still in music, and I actually have kind of skirted and avoided being associated with this because my OCD really gets the best of me in this field. But I started getting into security stuff, physical security as well as InfoSec. And I started going to 2600 meetings in Baton Rouge at LSU. And I started auditing classes and stuff like that. And that's actually where I learned a lot about programming too. But I first got into security. And then I also was working out at Stennis Space Center over in Mississippi and got into clustering because the first Beowulf cluster, unbeknownst to a lot of people, was actually getting developed there in Mississippi, which just seems weird. It's like, whoa, technology developed in Mississippi. But yes, there it was getting built. And like the combination of all these things was just sort of weird. But one thing that I did notice, and one thing I've always loved about, like I've never been in SF full time, but I've always lived in either Portland or Seattle. But in Portland, one of the things that was similar to like the scene in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, down there on the end of the coast and stuff, was that I did see the same people and we got to know each other. And what was interesting, like with the 2600 groups, we used Nix, and that was it. Like the first thing in every meetup was always, okay, we are a group of security-minded individuals, blah, blah, blah. One of the rules here is first and foremost, do not use each other's, legal names. You know, we are technically kind of sort of pseudo anonymous, but we have nicks. So we're going to use our nicks. Kind of very much like the Goofy Hackers movie, except I guess accidentally, to date myself, this was before the movie. So like all that was happening. But as I got to know these people that I was, you know, learning about cracking systems with and getting, you know, password lists and whatever, and getting the BBSs in weird ways and whatever, I started to learn their actual names because I was hanging out with them and stuff. And it got to be like a family of people that you were really into stuff with. And before long, you know, besides just doing the security stuff and the programming stuff, we're out, you know, hanging out and going to Jazz Fest and to whatever. And I really, really love that about New Orleans. And one of the things, like I tell people out on the West Coast and the Northwest specifically, I was like, you know, New Orleans might not be your cup of tea for a many number of reasons. It could be the violence, but we won't talk about that. Or it could just be the incessant humid heat, which may kick your ass really fast. You know, who knows? But you may fall in love with the food, or you may fall in love with New Orleans' giant heart that like is just on its sleeve as a city. It's a city that's got love that you just don't even realize until you're smack in the middle of it. And it's like the city just kind of embraces you with its music and festivals and all that kind of stuff. And that was kind of something that I didn't realize at the time amongst all the programming and the, you know, systems hacking and stuff. I was like, oh, that's something that I'll miss. But I left, and then I look back and I'm like, oh, I got to go visit New Orleans again sometimes. So cool stuff. Also, speaking of, you mentioned the hack week, was it?
Hack Night.
Hack Night.
It's just it's the name. It's the general name of the group, but there's actually a bunch of subgroups now, which I mean, incredible. There's actually a security group, probably a long descendant of your 2600 group, called NOLA Sec, which meets up. There's NOLA Sec. There's No Fun, which is NOLA Functional Programmers.
Nice.
There's a Google developer group. There's the front end party, and basically everyone shows up on Tuesday, and then those different groups all kind of like, there's a presentation space. So sometimes one group every week of the month will have their presentation if they're doing something.
Nice. So is let's see here, NOLA Hack Night. I'm going to post a link in chat, and let's see here, just in case, I'll post it in your private chat too. Is that the Hack Night?
That's it.
Cool. Oh yeah, and there's No Fun and NOLA Sec. GDG. Yep. Nice. Very, very cool. Yeah, so I love the little emoticon warrior dude with a
we have buttons. We have little buttons with the Hack Night on them now.
Oh, I love it. I love it so much. Yeah, so speaking of, one of the other things I put in chat there a little earlier is I wrote a post back in, originally I wrote this like 2 years ago, but then the pandemic happened and a bunch of other nonsense. But I wrote this back in March of this year and posted it. And one of the things I did a couple times over the years, is I've gone to New Orleans for a hack week where people that are either there already or people come in from places, we like pick a project and then we just hack on that project all week. And what we usually do is we get a house, like a full, you know, 3, 4, 5 story house, like one of those slender row houses in, you know, off a, right there in, I think the last one was Decatur, and it was like 2 blocks off a canal. It was like right smack in the city. It was great. Yeah. But, you know, you get enough people piled in there to work on a problem, and it actually gets priced reasonably. And you get to live smack in the center of the city and enjoy all the food and fun stuff and code on stuff. So I actually wrote a blog entry, and I'm planning to sometime early in 2022 get together another one of those hack weeks, and maybe, if possible, even make it a every half year thing. Because I really feel compelled to make more trips to New Orleans, because I don't feel like I get down there enough. So I will definitely loop you in on that. And I've gotten connected with some of the Slack group in one of the New Orleans tech Slack groups.
Oh yeah.
So I've been chit-chatting with a few people there.
What is our Slack group called? NOLA Devs.
Yeah, NOLA Devs. That's it.
That's it. I'm in there.
Cool. So yeah, I just got into that a while back, and I intend to loop that in. So, you know, yourself and anybody else watching, If you're interested in a hack week in New Orleans, I will be scheduling that. So, do a wave emoji or just, flip me the bird on Twitter or whatever you do, get my attention and I'll make sure to put you on the contact list for that. I think I got about 20 people that are interested in it so far. So I'm sure we'll be able to accrue a good number of smart individuals to get in there and bang away at something and create something cool. So that'll be a lot of fun. So besides the user groups and the tech stuff and all that, what's your favorite food? What's your favorite food in New Orleans? That's an obviously important question for someone living in New Orleans.
I mean, I would say Gulf shrimp pretty much anyway, because so for anyone who's visiting, there's a place called the West We Go Shrimp Lot. West We Go is a city. It's not a place you're going. It's an actual city. It's called West We Go, all one word.
Yep.
And the West We Go Shrimp Lot is just like all the shrimp sellers right off the boat coming off of the Gulf, parking right on the other side of the lot. And you can get the best shrimp you can ever get anywhere. Yep. And at prices that, are incredible because, that's where you're spending either $3.50 a pound up to like, if you're getting the big ones, it's like $4.50 a pound. But that
was going to be my next question was like, How much do they charge now? Because I remember going down to the boats down there and going like to the Gulfport in Mississippi, and you just go and you just scoop up a mess of shrimp, right? Then you take them home and you like boil them up and start peeling them and do whatever you're going to make, And it was just so unbelievably good. And everywhere else I've gone in the country, I'm like, how much a pound?
Yeah.
You want what? And they're flash frozen to boot. It's like, But that's epic. I love West We Go.
This is the thing that I don't understand. So like, I can go to Rouse's. Rouse's is a grocery store, or Bromart, which is another grocery store.
Yep.
And you can get Gulf shrimp, and it's like a dollar or two more to get them out of the grocery store. But like if you go to Costco in New Orleans, which I would assume they would have had this game on lock, right? Like they should be selling me 10 pounds of Gulf shrimp right out of the ocean this morning. And they still only sell shrimp that's from Thailand, and I'm like, I don't get it. Like,
what the heck? That's so weird.
What are you doing here?
I've been baffled by the supply chain situation like that sometimes too, because it's just like, wait, you got stuff from the other side of the planet, and you're gonna sell it to me for up here in Seattle, it's like shrimp are like $20 a pound for some of that stuff. Like if I get Gulf shrimp, it's flash frozen, flown up from there, but it's $28 a pound or something. And I'm like. Okay, that's painful considering, but at the same time, like we get crawfish up here every once in a while. I'm like, oh my God, crawfish, and I get excited about it. Then I'm like, whoa, settle down, Adrian, because one, they're flash frozen, so they're all dead. Yep. You can't boil them right. Like none of the stuff that I was used to in New Orleans works because it just doesn't functionally work with that. So it's weird. But then I noticed, and I remember reading about it for years, like how China was becoming the dominant crawfish seller. Because they realized that we like the things, and they were like, meh. So they started farming them for us, and they flash freeze them, fly them over here, and we get just like 80% of the supply in the country is actually from China. And then, Louisiana, of course, is like, nah, it's our crawfish. So a lot of them stay in state.
Except for so crawfish has a season for all the viewers watching, and crawfish season is now over. But all the tourist restaurants have to still serve crawfish. Yeah. So almost every restaurant you go to now will have like little asterisks that's like domestic when in season. Because if you come here between like May and I think it'll be until like November or something where you can get them again. It's just going to be foreign crawfish that you're eating in your crawfish etouffee. But now it's shrimp season, so that's who cares? Because shrimp are better than crawfish. Sorry, I don't know if you have strong opinions there.
No, I like crawfish a lot. They suck up the flavors and everything, but I'll take some good, like straight out of the Gulf shrimp. Yeah, that's my option. It's less fighting. You get more. You don't have to sit there and chill with them and stuff. It's nicer, and you can boil them too and get that same great flavors and stuff. So that's awesome. But one of the things I discovered living in Portland is there's actually just outside of the city by just a couple miles, there's a little I guess, township or whatever. It's like 20,000 people or something. But they have a crawfish season. But there, it's 2 weeks. It's 2 freaking weeks. So like every single transplant from Louisiana that lives in the Portland area is there for like that 2 weeks. And there's like a festival and nobody leaves. It's hilarious. So it's like this, the bohemianness of Portland combined with the epic festival crawfish food of Louisiana combined into like this 2 weeks. And then it's over and it's just like crickets. You don't hear nothing about crawfish because nobody really wants to mess with the whole fly it in from God only knows where type of mess. So it's back to salmon. Oh man, that's funny. But yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to the 2022 trip. I hope that all works out and turns out great. It should. I've managed it before and it's been awesome every time. So, and I always love getting we got a space over there just in the warehouse district off of, what is that? West of Canal. And it's right smack in the big buildings. And you'd think it'd be, from being on the West Coast, like in San Francisco, Seattle, etc., you'd think, oh, the warehouse space will be $8,000 a day. And they're like $250. I'm like, whoa. So, we can get a whole crowd of people into some of the like bigger spaces and have plenty of room and hack on stuff in the room. And it's just, it's great. It's nice to be able to get space like that and pay what is effectively nothing. But at the same time, it's like, oh, you overcharged us 40% because you realize we're not from New Orleans. That's fine, whatever. We are from the West Coast. People are used to paying crazy prices. So just go ahead anyway. But that's awesome.
I mean, the CBD, the Central Business District now is also booming. Like, I don't know if you've been back in a while, but it is full of tons of restaurants now, and
nice.
Like, all the young professional class seems to want to live in that area. So it's full of a lot of really good stuff.
Yeah. Whereabouts are you at there in the area?
So I live just on the other side of Magazine Street from the Garden District. So for those of you watching, the Garden District is the old mansion place where when you think about New Orleans, you think about those huge mansions with all the pillars. That's the other side of the street from where I live, which is not that. But so I live with the Mississippi River on one side of me and the Garden District on the other. So it's an area called the Irish Channel. It's really nice. Yeah, it's a nice place. It's great to live.
Yep.
I like it a lot.
That's cool. That's when I got out to the West Coast and I started looking at houses, the first thing I thought was like, oh, I could buy one of those ones that I always wanted in New Orleans.
Yep, that's well, when we left the West Coast, it was basically, you moved from a 2-bedroom, 1-bed house in Oakland, and we basically were like, oh, we can basically live in any house we want in all of New Orleans.
Yep.
For selling our old house, and that was, so we just found the place that we wanted.
Very nice, very nice. I'm very glad for you. I think if I had figured this out like a decade ago, I would probably be in New Orleans, but I didn't figure it out until last couple of years. Matter of fact, I was too busy figuring out how to pay rent for crappy studios on the West Coast.
Yeah, like
I didn't even think back.
I've just been very lucky. All the right places, right time, and right interests that I was able to get here. So
that is very cool. So before we part ways for the day, are there any other things you'd like to give a shout out to, or any other questions, thoughts, random notions, or such things?
I mean, I'd basically say Apache Iceberg is a really cool project. Anyone who's interested in contributing to, I mean, I personally would be glad to help anyone who wants to contribute to the project, do something. I do have the commit bit on it, so I can help you find something to do and help you get a contribution ready. So,
cool.
If you want to do that.
I like that phrasing. Get a contribution out of you.
Yeah.
So let's hear. Here's the link. I think this is the link. I didn't actually look at the link. I'm assuming that I got it right. So iceberg.apache.org. Check it out and ping Russell. He'll get you a commit bit so you can commit and get some contributions out of you. That's awesome, man. Well, it's been most excellent talking to you and catching up about Fat City and all that. Have a king cake or two. Enjoy the shrimp, and I'll talk to you soon, especially about that upcoming Hack Week. We'll have to loop around about that. It'd be awesome. So on that note, we're going to disappear from the virtual waves of the internet, everybody. So have a good one. Cheers, Russell.
Thanks a lot. Talk to you later.